Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
And welcome to Interaction Design Day.
Happy Interaction Design Day. We're really excited to be here with all of you. And I'm excited to be here with you, Pek.
I'm excited to be with you,
Yeah.
Prakash. So we just had the amazing Koi Vin go on with Lindsay Monroe. Koi, if you don't know, he was named one of the top 50 most influential designers on Fast Company in 2011. That was amazing. So it's a real pleasure to have him on the show. And next up after us is Josh Silverman. All of us today here are talking about trust and responsibility.
That's right.
As designers. And so we'll cover that topic. I'd like to introduce my guest, Prakash Chandran, amazing designer. And so he cut his teeth being a designer at Picasa. So when I first met him, he introduced himself as a designer at Picasa, and I was just awestruck by that because I loved Picasa back in the day. The desktop experience was amazing, and then I learned that they got acquired by Google. Now he's a Google designer for a while. Worked on some amazing products, which he'll tell you all about, and he took an entrepreneurial journey, working on his own stuff, and he's also doing some work for Impekable, which is an honor to have him both.
It's an honor to be working with you, man. That's great.
All right. So yeah, you want to tell us a little bit more about yourself and your career?
A little bit more about me. Yeah, so like Pek said, I started with Picasa, and for those of you that don't know, it's like a photo organization software. It's kind of like iPhoto before iPhoto really existed and came into its own. And so I did that for a while. That got bought by Google. I was at Google for almost 8.5 years, and I got to design or work on the design of a lot of amazing products like Google Calendar, and ultimately I ended up leading the design and research team for Enterprise, which is now G Suite, which hopefully a lot of you use. And so after that I did a startup of my own, and now Pek and I get to work together on helping clients with their user experience and interaction design. So it's been great, and Pek, he downplays himself as well, but he's built this amazing, very reputable design agency where it's not only helped many great companies here in the Bay Area, but just internationally with their UX needs and challenges. But it's also been a great place for mentorship for more junior designers as they come up in the world. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, well, thank you for the intro.
Sure.
I was supposed to do that for you, so. So let's get right into it. So the episode is, we're talking about, well, first of all, it's World Interaction Design Day.
Yep.
And incidentally, the Impekable team worked on the website. So if you go to interactiondesignday.org, that's something that Impekable worked on. But
yeah, you can hop to my screen. Yeah,
if you can hop to Prakash's screen just to give folks a little sense for the folks who have not caught. But what is World Interaction Design Day about, Prakash?
Yeah, I mean, I think really what it is to show or to kind of surface and bring awareness to what interaction design is. It's first and foremost for interaction designers. But, us as designers and the people that are watching, we have a lot of influence into the way products are manifested out into the world. And we have a lot of responsibility in that. So I think that kind of dovetails into this year's theme, which is trust and responsibility. So I think it's a very relevant topic right now, right? Especially in the time that we live in. Some of the trust and responsibility we have as designers, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today.
Yeah, a lot of, in my mind, World Interaction Design Day kind of calls out design as a way to, a lot of people don't understand design, and it's, for many people, design is kind of the veneer, the paint job, what the colors, the typography, maybe a bit of layout. But for us as designers, I'd love to get your perspective. For me, quoting Steve Jobs is how things work, right? So my analogy when I explain, the profession of UX or the role of UX is more like in kind of like realist, kind of building terms. It's more like the architect. And not the painter.
Yeah.
How would you characterize interaction design to a layman?
Yeah, that's very much like the way, I think I would say it exactly the same way, like how a system works, how people interact with things. It's our job as designers to make the customers or the users of a product successful more often and faster. And so, one of the things that we talk about a lot is how can we make the customer experience in whatever it is we're designing. It can be a website, it can be a mobile app, it can be a product. How can we make that as frictionless as possible? And there are many ways that we can go about doing that. We've all used products that aren't really that great. And we're always like super frustrated around like, why is this experience so bad? And so, it's kind of our job to look at those things and to take out the complexity and just to make things like as one-click simple as possible. And so when I think about interaction design, I really think about those nuances. And then obviously there's this layer of how we present things to the user, right? Like there's so many different ways and user interfaces or ways of presenting a user interface. And I think this kind of dovetails, like I said, into the trust and responsibility aspect of it, because it's something that I don't think you inherently think about right off the bat when you're designing an interface. You just are like, well, I just need to solve a problem for someone, right?
Right.
So we can maybe talk a little bit about this year's theme and what that means.
Yeah.
What does it mean?
Yeah. So trust and responsibility. I feel like that means a lot of things for a lot of people.
Right.
But I was just thinking last night. Designers have a lot of responsibility. There's a lot of risk. Right, I'm gonna quote Uncle Ben. With great power comes great responsibility. And I was just thinking, like in D&D terms, the designer could be like a sorcerer or a wizard or some sort of magician, because they can conjure up doorways, they can take off doorways, they can create pathways. Basically, they shape your world. If your world is the app, right?
Yeah.
Like, in those terms. So how do you? So with that, I feel like the role of the designer is quite powerful.
Yeah.
And you can create a lot of trust, or you can take a lot of trust away. In design speak, there's this notion of dark patterns, like if you're a UX designer. And those are basically design patterns that do more bad than good.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you can talk a little bit about that. I'd love to hear more about how you think about trust and responsibility when it comes to design.
Yeah, first of all, you're such a big fat nerd, and that's why I love you so much. That's amazing, the D&D reference. I think, it is kind of what we were saying. We have the ability to conjure up these doorways through the interfaces that we create that really give a user insight into how the product works and how they're going to interact with it. And so, some of the dark patterns that Pek was talking about is, if you go to a website, have you ever filled out a form, for example, and subscribe me to your emailing list was already checked for you? That's been super frustrating. I feel like I have tons of spam because of that pattern right there. So it's something that, maybe from a business standpoint or the person that you're designing for, they're optimizing for as many email addresses as possible, but is that really the right thing to do as a designer? And this where trust and responsibility comes in, right? Like, we have to really be thoughtful, and it's our responsibility as designers to really think about, like, well, what's going to be the best thing for the user using the product, even if it makes good business sense to try to collect those email addresses, for example. That's just one example of many. Is that really the right thing to do?
Yeah. In this age where data privacy, data protection, the consumer's privacy is forefront in the news, I think this issue is even more important today. It's been in the news. There's certain apps out there, consumer apps, where you're thinking you're having a great time messing around with filters, but what you don't know is during your sign-up process, as you're going accept, skip, or next,
Yeah.
you basically signed away the rights to the images you take on that photo app, that filter app, and now they can use that for whatever nefarious purpose they see fit.
Yeah, we live in a world of data collection right now.
Yeah.
And everything that we do, seemingly, the apps that we download and the websites that we interact with, they're all collecting different data points about us. And I think us as designers, one of the things around this theme of trust and responsibility, it's our responsibility to tell the stakeholders, hey, listen, if we're going to be collecting data about people, we should be very upfront with them. And now, kind of getting into one of the things that we're going to talk about today. Now that GDPR is out there, I'm sure everyone has heard about this before. It's more mandatory. There's actually a fiscal penalty for not doing this right.
Yeah, that dovetails greatly into kind of the next topic, all related to data privacy and protection.
Yeah.
So Adobe has made it very easy for designers to consider some of these issues. You've probably been to sites where you've noticed new elements, for example, like, hey, what is this pop-up? What is this thing, this banner about cookies and stuff like that? What is cookies, for example?
Yeah.
So we can get into that. But Adobe has made it very easy to really incorporate some of these design elements so that you don't think about some of the heavy lifting. So Adobe partnered with Impekable to help create some of these cookie banners, and they've recently featured in a blog post.
Yeah, for sure. And if you go to my screen, I just pulled up the link real quick. This is the cookie banner UI kit, and a lot of you might be maybe asking, like, why would I use something like this and why it's important? And this is what I want to talk. Like, we'll design something real quick with this this UI kit. But I think I'd love to really talk a little bit about why this is important, not only as it relates to GDPR, but this whole transparency with the user, and then maybe even get in a little bit into how websites collect data, because I think people have a general understanding, but maybe we'll kind of set up that framework before we get started. So. For those of you that don't know, you've probably been navigating a website and you've seen banners pop up like this. Just like this website uses cookies. Click OK to dismiss this or to agree to the terms. And I think one thing to note is that when users go to a website, they're first and foremost wanting to consume whatever content is on that website. And I think they want to try to optimize to close that as quickly as possible. But this is where the trust and responsibility component comes in. It's our job as designers to be very clear with them around what type of data we're going to be collecting from those users. So we've tried to make these call-out banners a little bit more, to pop a little bit more, and we've partnered with Adobe to create this UI kit to do so. But just on the topic of what cookies are.
Yeah, what are cookies for the layman? Because all I know is
cookies are delicious treats that I like to eat after meals.
Prakash is famous. He's a cookie monster.
monster.
We call him the cookie monster at the office. So,
but yeah, maybe you can give some boilerplate into where cookies came from and what they do.
Yeah, so with respect to, back in the day when I was a web developer,
don't date yourself too much.
Yeah, the first browsers were, Mosaic and Netscape. So Netscape actually invented cookies, as Wikipedia has told me. But cookies are basically kind of breadcrumbs in kind of fairy tale. Yeah, that's why they call them cookies. That help track the user, essentially. They're little stubs of code that help you track the users, and all sorts of websites use them to track the user as they navigate to a site or as they navigate across sites. Ad technologies use cookies to track users across different websites. So like, Google's ad technology will put cookies. Whenever, for example, you sign up to a website and there's any sort of personalization, they're using cookies to enable some of that personalization.
Yeah, and it was really invented to actually make life easier for people, because I think the protocol of the web it's considered stateless, meaning it doesn't necessarily remember anything. So when you log in to a website, it checks the servers to make sure you're actually authenticated, and then it lets you log in. Well, without cookies, you would have to log in every time you did anything at all. So cookies are a way to store that information about who you are and make it really easy for you to have a seamless experience. So initially, it was kind of this force for good, and it is used that way in websites today. Now, over time, more and more information has been added to the cookie, right, about who you are. And then, there are ways that they can, track your cookies across different websites. So they can get a sense of your demographic information and when you visit different sites and you take certain behaviors, the cookie just learns more and more about you, and therefore the site, if they are reading your cookies, they can learn more and more about you. So when a user comes to browse your website, if you are using some of these cookies to enhance your website experience, it's really important, especially with the GDPR rules that are out there today, to make that really transparent to the user.
So tell us more about GDPR and how it pertains to cookies.
Yeah, so GDPR, I believe, was introduced in 2018, and it's the General Data Regulation Protection. There you go. I always forget. I just know GDPR.
Protection Regulation.
Protection Regulation.
GDPR, yeah.
This is good. But yeah, so
Privacy,
yeah. What?
What?
GDPR. 2018, it was introduced in the EU, and basically for websites, they put together a policy that said, listen, when you go to these sites, it's very important to be, this is what we're talking about today, transparent with the users that are coming there about what you're collecting from them. And things can't be nebulous or unambiguous. You have to be very, very clear. And it's not just around cookies, but it's even when you collect emails, opt-in, like you can't have things auto-selected for you. If you had a data breach or a hack, you have to be very explicit about when that happened. And I think within a week, within the breach happened. So there's a lot of different properties to what GDPR covers. And because of this, obviously, the sites even that we make here in the States, we have to abide by a lot of the rules and regulations that are there. And by the way, it's just best practice. So if we are building websites or designing websites that collect data, then it's our responsibility to surface these banners. And this is kind of what we're showing here today, and what we'll design in just a minute. I think the best thing to do is when you have a website, the best design is not to have the banner and not collect information about the user. And I think that's something that
until you need it.
Until you need it, exactly. So you want to design experiences that are frictionless and seamless. But if it's a simple marketing site, and you just want to tell the user a little bit of information about what your product does, do you really need to collect information about them? Maybe not, and then you don't have to put up those banners. But there are consequences, right? If you don't put up the banner and you are collecting data, there are fines, right?
There are fines, yeah. And from what I understand, you have to be very transparent about what type of data you're collecting. But also, with GDPR regulations, if the customer requests, the user requests it, you also have to remove the information, all this data about you as the user.
Yeah.
So the idea is your data as a consumer, the user is your own.
Yeah, for sure. So as Pek mentioned, I think Adobe makes this really easy. We had worked with them to put together this UI kit.
So what do we get with this kit? What are you?
Yeah, so let's. So if you look at this link, and I know that someone just posted that in the chat, which is great. Thank you very much for that.
That was me.
At the very bottom, you can download it over here for free. It's Adobe XD resource, and what you're going to get, and I'll go ahead and open it up right here. So I'm going to open up this cookie banner. There we go. So as we were opening it up here, we basically presented a number of different. There we go. We presented a lot of different web and mobile cookie banners for you to choose from, and it really depends, obviously, on the style guide and the look and feel that you're going for your website. But if you zoom in, there's basically two components. So let me just pick one real quick. So first and foremost, going to the banner itself. You've probably seen these banners. Sometimes it comes in from the top, sometimes it comes in from the bottom. Actually, that color just looks a little weird. Let's just do this one better. So this is an example of a basic cookie banner right here. By using this website, you agree to our cookie policy. We probably could be a little bit more explicit about what exactly we're going to be collecting from the user, but this is at least a baseline template for you to start working from. And if you go to some of the other ones, let me go to this one, for example. This one gives you a little bit more detail about what exactly is being collected. So real quick, we use cookies to understand, so on and so forth. you can go into great detail around the things that you're collecting from the user. And then you'll see this thing that says cookie settings. So a lot of people actually don't even realize that cookie settings exist in a website, but you as a user, based on the GDPR guidelines, are able to control the cookies that the website collects, or that's certainly best practices of what you should do. So when you click on the cookie settings, then you can expose to the user a modal dialog, and this comes with the kit completely for free. You're able to adjust the different contexts of the different cookies that you're collecting from the user. So there are the different cookies, and maybe we can talk about this a little bit before we put this in a design. There are different categories of cookies, right? There are marketing cookies, like ones that actually collect data for marketing purposes.
Yep.
There are performance ones that make their user's experience a little bit better. There are functional ones. So what are some of these cookies doing?
Yeah, so in my mind, you know, the categories of cookies are you're segmenting so that the choice is with the user, right? Whether I choose to share, for example, in this illustration, I'm choosing to share only my performance cookies so that I'm, you know, the performance of the website is optimized for my web viewing experience.
Yeah, that goes into what we were talking about earlier, making sure that logging in is seamless, right?
Yeah.
So making sure that I can use the website in a frictionless way. But then if you use cookies outside of this scope, then you're going to have to make sure you make it clear to the user. So if you're collecting data outside of the reasons that are listed here, you'll just add another switch there, and you'll allow them to control that setting. In the EU, it's actually mandatory to allow users to completely opt out of cookies. In general, it's not necessarily a regulation here yet.
Yeah.
But
we can see some examples of some websites.
Yeah, for sure.
Like
so let's
real
go
life.
to what are some of the ones we were talking about?
It's like Harrods,
Harrods,
Mark
that's a
and
good one.
Spencer's.
Let's
You
go
know, a
to
lot of
Harrods.
British, you know, UK sites where, you know, I think real life examples of you know, e-commerce. You'll see a lot of cookies because you have to.
Yeah, so here you can see on Harrods.com we use cookies by using the site you're accepting our cookie policy, right? So this is what we're talking about here, and there's different ways of doing the banner, and this is where it's a fine line, right? Like talking about trust and responsibility, like you have to think about how do you want to present this to the user. So this is a very lightweight version. You can see it here, but it doesn't really impede the experience. So just thinking about like how do we make it more explicit to the user that their data is being collected. But I'm gonna click on the cookie policy here, and we'll check out some other sites.
And someone in the audience, you know, that you've hit it right. Like this is something that I think, in my mind, a designer should help think about and not just throw it to the client to have to like think about these issues because. The client doesn't necessarily know best practices. That's why they're hiring you.
Yeah.
So if you don't know and they get fined, I think some of that responsibility is kind of on the designer for not pointing it out or helping think through these issues.
Yeah, I've worked with a bunch of startups, and you know they're really optimizing to launch as quickly as possible. They're not thinking about these things. They also don't mind. You know, some of them don't mind. You know, collecting user information. They're like, oh, you know, what is this going to hurt? I'm not going to do anything with it. But this is where we as designers have that responsibility, like you said, to put our foot down and say, hey, listen, this is really important. And actually, you can get fined quite a bit of money for not adhering to this. You know, to make it obvious. So here on Harrods, for example, they make it pretty explicit around what cookies are. It gives you a little bit of an education, and then settings to actually do something with it. So that's just one example. I think Sainsbury was another site we were looking at, right?
Yep.
And you'll notice certainly with all of the sites within the UK. So see, look, they're a lot more explicit about, look at that cookie banner compared to the other one.
That's a good percentage of the website.
Yeah, that's
right
that's a great percentage. So accept and close or find out more. So really clear call to actions on, and here you go, like the different sections around what cookies are, how we use them, and what you can do with them.
I like the
Are they showing
illustration.
cookies here?
Yeah, the bakery section.
Look how awesome
It's
that
like,
is.
That's funny.
Yeah, that's great. And yeah, if you're doing a consumer product good with cookies, then you should have some fun with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can customize these cookie banners however you want. So anyway, so that's kind of like the cookie policies and how you've seen it implemented. And I'm sure as you've shopped on your own or just gone to different websites, you've probably seen this surface itself quite a bit. So I'll show you an example of how we might implement it into one of our designs. So for example, one of our clients, why don't I pull this up right now? Why don't I pull up Central?
Sure.
And maybe you can tee it up a little bit, and then I'll put a cookie banner on the kit. So here we go.
Yeah, so Prakash is about to open a design we worked on not too long ago for Central Department Store, which is a retailer out in Thailand. It's one of Thailand's biggest retailers. So anyways, Impekable worked on the website. Being e-commerce, we definitely, the customer definitely collects information about the user.
Yeah.
And we're going to show you how easy it is to incorporate these cookie banners that are provided by Adobe.
Yeah, awesome. So here's the web landing page right here. So one of the things when you go to view it, and I'll just press play. Oftentimes I remember, so I'm not in the day-to-day design as much anymore. I kind of do more strategy, but I remember the longer that you design the site, sometimes it's a little bit hard, like it defaults to showing you everything. So one thing that I'm going to do to make it a little bit easy for us to talk about this today is in the prototype view. Let me just click here. You can turn scrolling on. So I'm going to go scrolling to vertical, and right now it's encompassing the entire artboard that we've created, but I'm going to go ahead and change that to 800 pixels. So when I preview it, it's going to actually look like something I can see here, right? And I can actually do a little bit more because I have more screen real estate to work with, 10,000. So here we go. So this is our landing page. So if we wanted to put a cookie banner on here, pretty straightforward, right? I already have this kit open. I'm just going to choose this black banner over here. I'm going to copy it, and I'm just going to paste it. And then I'll put it right at the bottom. And then there it is, right? So we can adjust the font size and everything like that. Obviously, the components is linked in Adobe XD. You can see that by the link over here on this side. So if you wanted to make the edits here, it would update across all of the different artboards that you're working on this from. But we wanted to just make it that simple for you to take the component and drop it in to your landing page. So, you don't really have to start from scratch, right? They can just use this as a baseline and then just get it going there.
That's amazing. Yeah, less work for me. I love it.
Yeah, exactly. Or I can just use this one, no problem, right? And then you can have fun with it. Make sure that it matches your brand and your aesthetic and your layout. And then similarly, in terms of like this more info call to action, if you wanted to pull up the modality around what it looks like to customize your cookie, I'll just go ahead and take that out and copy it here. You might be able to do that just right in the center, and then you could put a little modal background behind that. So we make it really as easy as possible. And I think one of the things that's great is this will work across different sites. This is just an example of one of the customers that we have. That, as you know, XD, that's a massive community with lots of different UI kits that are out there. And so we downloaded a universal UI kit for the purposes of this talk. Makes it super easy to start from scratch and to start designing immediately.
How would you show this cookie banner to a client? Would you just mock it up with kind of the home page and then just slap the cookie banner on here? Or is there in your mind a better way to kind of illustrate that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think one of the things, so they're going to obviously be focused on the design and the purpose of what the page that you're creating does. But I think it's always important to start with a conversation around why this is important. And the purpose of really being transparent with the user around what data you're collecting. And then, yeah, of course, the mechanics of saying, okay, well, they're going to say, okay, well, how does this look? Is this going to impede the user experience or stop them from actually shopping on the site? And then that's when I think it's really important to show them like how that might work. So, I'll toy around a little bit and add this, but maybe you can add a little bit more color as I do that. Like how would you, for example, have you like for Central, for example, like how did that conversation go in terms of saying like, hey, this is an important thing to add?
Yeah, I think for us, making sure that it's we illustrated via prototyping, and we can use some of the XD's prototyping functions to illustrate that really this is not going to get in the way of the customer experience very much and illustrate that in very clear terms
Right.
within the prototype where you might show the banner. If you just show the website with the banner and then that's the first thing they see and they can't move away from it, they're like, oh man, this is horrible. Take it out, take it out. But if you can show them that, you hit this button and it goes away, or you scroll and it kind of goes away, or whatever, then it's not a bad experience, and then you're still addressing the needs.
Yeah, and just another thing to call out there, a lot of these components, they already have a responsive resize on them. So if it doesn't fit your artboard, you can easily just go ahead and adjust them, which makes it, again,
amazing,
super easy to implement.
This makes my life easy.
Yeah, exactly, and that's what we're about here. And just kind of on the topic of trust and responsibility here. So obviously adding. Let me take out a little bit of that white space there. While we're on the topic of this, it's certainly important to really expose, obviously, what data you're collecting from the user. But there are other components of the trust and responsibility. I was just looking at this template right here that you can start from, and one of the things that they have at the bottom. I'm going to move this to the top real quick. Is they have these logos here at the bottom. So let me actually pull this up, right? So here at the bottom, this is what we call social proof, right? And so sometimes when a user is coming to your website to use it for the first time, they don't know anything about the product or service that you are putting together. So part of trust and responsibility is putting together some social proof around who's using the product, just to validate that, hey, there's other people like you that are using this. There are trusted companies and brands out there. So that also, in my mind, encompasses trust and responsibility, is making sure that the user feels comfortable in engaging with your service even after they understand the data that's being collected, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. How does Impekable show trust and responsibility on our website?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Let's go over to the Impekable website.
I'd love your opinion on it.
Yeah.
It's probably been a while since we got some feedback from you.
Yeah, for sure. So Impekable. So here, our enterprise clients. So right now, you can obviously see Impekable's work with a number of different amazing big clients. So if I am someone that is considering having my site or my mobile app, my product designed by Impekable, I know that, hey, listen, they work with some really big players in town. I want to make sure that there's that social proof there, and it makes sense. Like, they're gonna be able to solve my problem because they're designing products for people that reach millions of people, right? So I think that's really important. So I think I would even say maybe bringing this up a little bit further to the top of the fold. Like, I think it's great that on the background you can obviously see there's a brand name right on the background here, but I think even just putting maybe a strip just similar to actually what this does might help a little bit.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
That's great feedback.
Yeah, for sure. So again, this cookies and privacy goes here, and then in terms of like illustrating this to the client, let's say I wanted this to fade. Let's say I wanted this to be a little bit more explicit. One thing that I might be able to do. Let me actually just create another artboard down here. And I just used the little hotkey to do that. And so what are we at right here? We are at, and as I'm putting this together, we're at 1366. So I'll use one of XD's awesome prototyping features here by 800. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm trying to put together an example of how I might show a client how this works, right? So I'm gonna put this cookie banner here, and like, let's say I want this to show as a modal after the user visits the page, right? Because it's something that I want actually the user to be aware of rather than it loading with the rest of the page.
Right, because then you don't notice it because it was already there.
That's right. So maybe, so as I put this together, Pek, like I'm curious to hear your opinions on like the different styles of these cookie banners and ones that you've seen work better than others.
Yeah, I think when you show something the moment everything loads, I totally agree with you. You probably don't notice it.
Yeah.
So if you want people to take action, you want people to notice it, there's probably a couple of animations, tips and tricks, or design tips and tricks that you want to employ to call out or bring to attention these banners.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I just did this thing called a cookie modal here. And what I can do is, using the prototyping tool, I'm going to go ahead and drag this prototype arrow over here. And instead of a regular transition, I'm going to do an overlay, right? And so I want to overlay it just right at the top over here. So let me actually do that again. I'm gonna click this, there we go. So right there, it's right at the top. And then instead of doing it on tap, I'll do it on time, right? So I'm gonna say a time, and how many seconds do you think that would be good to capture the user's attention? 1 second?
Probably 1 second, because
Okay.
I'm just, it's like, give it to me.
I know, because that's another thing. I think that's an important point. Users just want to dismiss it and get going right away. So how do we make this as seamless as possible? So I'm just going to save that. And then what will happen is if I open the prototype view of this, in a second, the mode will
Boom, see,
appear.
now I notice it because it faded in.
Absolutely. So now you look at it and you're like, okay, this is a lot more explicit, right?
Yeah, and I like that you faded the background, made it a little darker, because otherwise, that brightness, I just tend to focus on that.
Right, and so this is a great way. You were asking about how I might present the work to a client. I think sometimes just obviously seeing it, and us as designers, we don't normally think about designing cookie banners and experiences that engender trust and responsibility. But this is part of it, and with tools like this UI kit, we can make it very, very, very easy to do. So as I mentioned here before, there's a number of different ways to do it. We were able to do it by just showing the banner below, but if I'm showing a client, hey, after 1 second, we show the cookie and privacy banner, and then boom, it works very easily.
We have someone in the audience asking how to avoid these cookie pop-ups so that they can get to the content. Must I agree to the cookie? Well, I think there's a couple options. One, they're trying to optimize for you to agree to the cookie. The big call to action, the big, in this case, orange button, is they want you to agree to the accepting cookies.
Yeah.
But there is a way, if you don't want to share your privacy, to not agree to the cookies. And usually it's the other button, the text link, maybe cookie settings.
Yeah.
If you don't want to give away your privacy.
Right, and so the cookie settings, what you can do, again, what that's going to do is and I'm just going to kind of zoom into this prototype that we have right over here. Or sorry,
by the way, that's my wife on that.
Hi, Kim.
Hey, Kim.
So here, this is what we were talking about earlier. It's important to have the context in terms of what data is being collected, and then being able to allow the user to shut these off. Now, if you go to a lot of sites here in the US, they don't always allow that. So that's a good question, Kim, because sometimes really it's just like, I'm dismissing this. And
in the US, the regulation is not so strict that like the EU, where I can opt out. So it's just sort of a courtesy of like, hey, we're collecting cookies, by the way, just so you know.
I mean, I've seen sites that even do something like, instead of cookies and privacy, they'll say something like, we want to make your experience a great one, right? And then here on the OK understood, it's just like, cool story. Like it's so ambiguous. Like
cool story, bro.
Yeah, cool story, bro. Like you don't even know what's happening here. So as a user, when you see this, they're like, okay, we want to make your experience a great one. I don't actually know what that means, and so they're kind of like doing this like roundabout way of asking. And this gets into your whole thing around dark UX patterns. There are many different ways to express things to the user, and here it's just like this unambiguous. Like, what exactly are they asking for?
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So this is kind of an example of just because the pattern might be right and we make it really easy to put in this banner, you have to make sure that the language is very explicitly clear, and then the cookie settings, then you would implement the modal dialogue of the same thing. Why don't we move towards using the cookie banner on, kind of maybe putting together a brand new site. But before we do that, I want to talk about other elements of like what trust and responsibility means.
You touched on that, like some of the logos kind of, showcase trust, because if those brands trust, this website, this agency, this whatever,
right?
Then so tell me, let's talk about other elements of trust. How do you engender trust in design?
So there's like the social proof element, like I was talking about. There's the language, certainly the language that you're using when you design your products. But I would say this even goes as far as to, like, we all use our mobile phones these days. We all have apps that ask for our location or ask to use certain permissions on our device. I think making sure, like, have you ever used those apps where you just all of a sudden get a pop-up saying like, this app wants to use your location. And you're like, okay, well, I'm not exactly sure why this particular, whatever app that you might have needs location if it's not a location-aware app, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so how do we, as designers, make sure that the user is aware of that they're going to that their location is going to be collected and why that's important for the app? So I think that that's also something else that I personally think, especially as we go more mobile, trying to like say, okay, listen, we're going to be collecting your location information. This pop-up is going to appear, and this is why we're using it. Yeah. So that's my opinion on it.
Yeah. So great point. I just remember this one annoying app that I don't recall the app, but it kept asking me for my location. And from the context of the app, it's like, you don't need my location to perform this function. Why do you need my location? So I kept, it kept asking me every time I opened the app, and I kept saying no. Contrast that to an app that we made a while back, a movies app. We do ask for the location, but the way we did was we asked for the location.
What app was that?
It was called Marquee. It's an old app.
Marquee, okay.
Marquee, but basically, Marquee Movies. But basically, when you tapped on the Theaters app, Theaters tab, that was when we asked for the location because you want to know, we need the location to show you the theaters near you. Yeah. So it makes sense within the context. That's when I'm likely to share my location because I want to see theaters near me.
Sure.
Versus, when you first sign up, hey, I thought I was watching trailers. Why do you need my location? Yeah. Right. But if I tap on the locations tab, and it's like, oh, I want to show you theaters near me, but therefore I need your location. May I have your location? That's when it makes sense.
Yeah. And I also think, it's also something that engineers that are implementing this don't necessarily, like some of them will totally understand, but oftentimes when engineers are implementing something, their requirement is that they get the user's location, not when exactly it's asked for. So I think as designers, being very specific around when we ask the user for things, that it should be in context, like you said, of the experience that they want to access, right? So
right. Yeah. If you're asking everything up front, right? Oh, I need all your friends, your address book. I need your location. I need your photos. Like what the heck?
Yeah. What does that even mean?
Yeah. What does that even mean?
Right.
But
what are some other things? I'm curious. So besides the phone stuff, as designers, obviously we have to be. I think there's a theme around like us being really clear about what data we're collecting from the user and when we're going to ask for them for that data. But as designers, what other things, I'm curious to hear your thoughts, do you think kind of are around this theme of trust and responsibility? Because it's such a broad topic, right? And like there are very specific things like GDPR, like we're talking about today, but there's also more kind of these nuanced things.
Yeah, I think, with social networks, it's really hard to pinpoint, like if I'm sharing a post and there's levels of granularity, like I like what Facebook does. For example, when you share a post, is it only, for my direct friends? Is it up to friends of friends? Is it completely public? There's that little icon. Right. And I have security that, if it's just the friends icon, this is being shared only to my friends. Yeah. So, I think that little piece of design gives me some, comfort that I'm sharing this to just a certain audience versus the rest of the world.
And I also feel like when I sometimes when I go to those social media apps, the privacy setting is like off to the side somewhere. Like Facebook makes it a little bit more explicit, but some things are automatically defaulted to public and then also hidden like away in the bottom left of like the modal dialogue or something to where I don't even see it, and then all of a sudden it's kind of out to the world. Right. So that's another example of like this trust and responsibility and how you design these interfaces. It's like a dark pattern, right? Yeah. Someone in the chat said asking access to the camera for a meditation app.
Yeah, why do you need to look at me for, unless you're like doing some computer vision and seeing if I'm
or asking for your contacts in a meditation app. Yeah, so it's like these different things that just don't make any. You have to kind of put yourself in the user's shoes. I mean, this sounds obvious, but like if you're using an app that you're designing for the first time, like what would a normal person think when they're looking at this? Like why do you, like you said, why do you need your camera if I'm gonna have my eyes closed? Like this doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
So I think having that conversation with yourself is a good thing. So one of the things that another thing that we'll put together is another landing page, just using one of these cookie banners again, just to show you like potentially like doing something from scratch and using one of these universal UI kits, how easy it is to do. Right. Yeah, so as I'm doing this, just maybe like talking about cookies and privacy, and we talked about like today's environment and like today's appetite for
it's a hot topic.
It is a very hot topic, and you've been seeing a lot of key players in the news that are kind of responsible for these things. So maybe talk a little bit about, as I kind of tee this up here, from a leadership perspective. Someone mentioned earlier in the chat how difficult it is to convince your manager, but like maybe what are some arguments that we might be able to like arm them with? So they
one is the stick, right? When you're talking about the carrot and the stick, there's huge GDPR fines. So like if you just Google GDPR fines, you'll find a lot of literature of what not implementing this could cost the firm, the customer, the firm, and then potentially your job. So that's one, and I think in this age of people who are more conscientious, more conscious about things. When people are eating, kind of organic food, they want to know where things are sourced. They want to know that they have control of their privacy. The consumer is more educated these days, so that you can't get away with what you used to get away with.
Yeah.
So I think in that sense, you have to do these things because that's how you remain competitive.
Yeah.
As a company, as an organization.
Yeah.
And then also it speaks to you as a company and then the type of people you want to attract, right? Like if you are all about
absolutely, that makes a lot of
dark
sense.
patterns, you get you want to like slide in, grabbing all your the user's contacts and then spamming them. That probably attracts a different type of person or designer than the upstanding. Like I want to be clear and transparent. Like it's all about your brand, what you stand for, and the both the users and the people you want to attract to your firm.
Right, and I think this kind of gets into the conversation around like the core values of a company. And sometimes entrepreneurs and CEOs are very mindful of exactly what that means, but sometimes they aren't. And that's sometimes it's something that a design centered person might think about and help surface to the leadership team around having those clear values for how they approach customers and how they approach design. Because like you said, that's a massive recruiting tool. I think that's something I know that is also important at Impekable. Like
that's actually one of the core values is trust and transparency.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely. And why do you feel like, as you put that together, I'm curious, like why was that something that was important? Because I'd say that you had this before GDPR and all of this stuff. Like why did you feel that was important at the time when you were doing this agency?
Well, one of my guiding principles was I wanted to build an agency that, like, say, a younger Pek would have really wanted to work at.
Yeah.
And just thinking about my experience at various agencies and other companies, one of the things that I really liked at one agency was every month they'd have like a town hall, and they were very transparent about things. Like they communicated to the team, hey, here's how we're doing as a company, here's the new accounts we're starting, here's things that's not going well.
Yeah.
It was pretty transparent, and I really liked that, and I basically kind of took that and made it our own.
Yeah. I think everyone wants to be, I don't think anyone wants to be in an environment where things are held from them or they feel like they're being duped or anything like that.
Well,
right?
I mean, there's different cultures, right? Like at a company, a fruit company whose products we use, secrecy is tantamount, right? Like it's all about secrecy.
Yeah.
Projects are worked in secrecy. You don't talk about your work, whatever you're working on, and that's a different culture, and that's okay too, right? It's all about what you stand. They make great products. We love their products. We use their products. But the culture there is very much a secret,
Yeah.
and it for some people it can be quite stressful, right? Like you can't even, if you're working on a new top secret project and you come home, you talk to your spouse and like, hey, what are you working on? You can't even talk about your work. That's
Wow.
that's really stressful, right?
Yeah.
For a lot of people. For us, of course, we sign NDAs with customers, and there's certain things we can and cannot talk about. But if a project is public, we definitely want to talk about it and show it and stuff.
Yeah.
But even within inside the company, we want to create a culture that where we trust our employees to do the right thing. And we take those we call them Legos away if they break that trust, but we start with trust.
Yeah. Start with trust. I like that a lot. I think just that's a good rule of thumb.
Trust but verify.
Trust but verify.
Yes.
Yeah, I like it. As we as designers are creating things, I think that's a good framework for us to operate in. And so, I'm just going to put together another example of a landing page and how easy it is to use one of the cookie banner templates to do so. And you'll notice like I'm always starting with something already, right? There's so many different UI kits that are available for Adobe XD. So I'm just taking an example of one, and I'm just going to put together a quick site. Like of course, you should be able to start from scratch as well. But one of the beautiful things about this, especially because I don't have as much time to do the day-to-day design, is that I don't need to start from scratch. I have the cookie banner template kits that I can just drag in, and I have these universal components that are already done, and all the components are already here defined for me.
And this comes to, I think, our philosophy at Impekable, where it's great to be able to design from scratch, but we're also pragmatists, and we're practical people. And ultimately, the client just, the customer, the business need, a lot of times we just want the stuff done, right?
That's right.
From my business perspective, if I could snap my fingers and have the job done, that more power to you, right? And as a mentor, I like young designers, new designers to use UI kits because they don't have the muscle memory or the best practices yet.
Yeah.
In terms of design and what goes where. I remember I was mentoring at a coding, design kind of boot camp. And one of the designers, I was reviewing designs, and one of the designers had put the back button, it was like on the top right or something, and that just like, that's interesting.
Right.
Why did you do that? It was
Right.
like, I don't know. He had no good reason other than he just thought that's where it went. So and I'm fine with breaking convention if you have a good reason to do so, but if you do it because you don't know what you're doing, that's bad. To me, why? Give me your thoughts on that.
Well,
I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah,
on
because
that.
I'm actually curious whether that. So it's interesting, and I'm wondering if it falls into this spectrum of like trust and responsibility as well as designers. I think. When I remember when I was just starting out and kind of doing more tactical design work here, I almost felt like it was cheating to use a template. I felt like it wasn't my work. I felt like I was being irresponsible to the stakeholders that I had put together. But I think over time, as I got a little bit more into a leadership position, I started to realize something that you said earlier around. What problem are you trying to solve for your users and the end customer, and where does it make sense to innovate? And I think that for a lot of, especially a lot of these templates, there's a lot of wonderful designers out there who've put in the thought to the nuanced details of, for example, the layout and all these different product pages that would take you hours to do. So I'm sure that the stakeholder is 100% okay with you starting with a baseline framework and then innovating where it absolutely makes sense.
Differentiating.
Yeah, and then like to your point around trying to put the back button potentially somewhere else, always making sure that you have a reason to do so, right?
And you mentioned something great about, I didn't think of it in terms of trust. I think of it in terms of convention and design patterns, right? Like I'm used to the back button being in a certain place, right? In an iOS app, it's on the top left. In an Android app, it's on the bottom left. So when things break convention, I don't know my way around. And to me, think about that breaks trust. It's like, oh crap, I don't know. I can get lost within this app, I no longer trust it, and now I have to take, it takes more time to navigate this app. I trust this app a little less because it broke convention.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, one of the things that you have to consider when you're designing something is like the patterns that your customers are already used to, and I think that even though you don't think that falls into this whole trust and responsibility aspect of design, is that, one of the things that I love about interaction design is it's constantly changing. The patterns that we know today will be very different tomorrow because we're operating in different modalities, we're operating on different interfaces, and we as interaction designers need to have that responsibility to be ingrained. And this is why I love that we are in this community and talking with each other and sharing this knowledge, because we kind of need to have a pulse on what each other is doing, because we are basically designing things for users around the world.
Yep.
And so how can we make sure that the things we're doing are as consistent as possible within the current zeitgeist or framework of the way people are thinking about them, right? Wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, one of the things that I actually wanted to ask from the chat as I'm putting this together is, I'm curious as to what you think about, when you think about trust and responsibility, what do you think about? Where have you come across this? If you're a designer, have you come across scenarios where you weren't sure whether something was necessarily the right thing to put into place, or these dark patterns that I was talking about? Were you asked to ever do something that was slightly questionable? Or have you come across a product that was like the meditation app example? Have you come across a product that was a little bit, the way that they asked for data wasn't necessarily the right thing? Or is it something completely unrelated that we're not even talking about today? Because it's such a kind of a broad topic here.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from the audience.
Yeah.
Another site I just thought of where the trust was a little bit eroded was, it was like a directory site. And you go to this directory site, I won't mention the name, but you go there, and by default, it was so subtle. By default, it was sorted by sponsored results.
Really?
So you get there and you type something and you think, oh, I'm just gonna get the best results, right? The most relevant results to me. But really, what I'm getting is the people who paid the most first. Yeah. And then until I sorted by natural results, I wasn't gonna get that. Yeah. It was so sleazy.
There's some shopping sites I go to that do that, very big shopping sites. And yeah, when they put the sponsored results first, it's the highest dollar wins, but it's not. Is that the best product for the user?
Yeah. Is that what I was looking for?
Exactly.
Not necessarily.
Yeah. And so I think there's a fine balance. But I'm curious, as a business owner, what do you think about okay, yes, there's trust and responsibility, but there's also the bottom line. I need to make sure that, for example, the sponsored result means that they're making money, right?
And that you're getting paid.
Yeah. So how do you think about that?
I think like everything in life, it's not black and white.
Yeah.
It's a spectrum, right? But it's also, I don't know. I think as a company, as an organization, as a person, you definitely should draw a line somewhere in the sand.
Yeah.
And there's certain things we won't do. There's certain things we okay, well, it's okay to do, but you have to set that for yourself.
Yeah, but how do you and I think maybe this comes down to the core value aspect of it, right? Because when you operate from a framework or a system, right, then you kind of say does this align with the framework that I've set up for how I want to run the company?
Yeah. So for us, it's simple. It's kind of like the golden rule. So the brotherly rule, the golden rule, how treat others as you'd like to be treated.
Right.
So if you don't mind this, then it's okay. But if this is something that you wouldn't even do to yourself, why would you do it to other people?
But someone said in the chat, keep in mind that we're not the user. I think that's a really good point, because some of this stuff is so subjective, and even with the brotherly rule that we're talking about, the things that we think are
okay as designers,
totally,
a user be no.
And I think this is why user research is very important. Understanding who your customer is, and understanding that we call it the ICP, the ideal customer profile. Who is the ultimate champion user for the website, the product, the system that you're putting together, and how are you best servicing them? Because you are, as much as we think so, we're not designing everything, or we're not designing something for everyone. It's generally for that niche group of user, and it's our responsibility as designers to make sure that we're talking to them in the right language, to make sure that we're talking to them outside of designing the app. Go out and talk to your users, figure out what drives them, what motivates them, what's important to them, and then based on your core values as an organization or as a designer and how you like to design, make decisions accordingly, right?
You've touched on a very important point of user experience design, which is actually talking to the user instead of just working within the tool. Tell us more about, I'm curious about, for example, your time at Google, and beyond, and how kind of you took that practice for some of the folks in the audience. And how you conducted, kind of talking to the user. I'd love to hear more about that.
I mean, we definitely had the philosophy of do the right thing for the user, and the rest is going to fall into place. And so, how do we get in front of the user? Now, it was a wonderful place to work because Google had so many wonderful resources for us to reach so many different users. Google touched obviously millions and millions and millions of users, and so it was very easy to get those candidates in. And what we did is we would have these amazing tools or usability studies that were like, for example, we could watch the users in their environment using the product. We could bring them in for an on-site usability study and watch them use the product. But I think we were very focused at Google at understanding what the needs of the users were, where they were having hiccups. And one of the things that's important, and you'll learn more as you kind of get, if for those of you that are a little bit more novice, as you get into leadership positions, the importance of user experience evangelism. And I think this even falls into the scope of trust and responsibility, because when you're at an organization, even like Google, there were these small teams. And these teams usually consist of a product person, a designer, QA, and engineer, and engineers. And usually the QA and engineer people, they don't have necessarily access to see what the users are doing day to day. They just look at things on a list, like a bug list, and they just fix it. So it's your responsibility as a designer to evangelize and advocate for the user. You've heard this before. And bring those engineers and the people that aren't designing directly for the user into the experience. So if there's a usability study, if you can hop on, now with today's tools, you can video conference directly with them. You can publish a prototype to the web using XD. You can share that out, share screens, and have your engineers sit down with you. Look at, have them feel and experience your user's pain and what motivates them. And I think that's really what's gonna really produce the best product.
So you touched on a very interesting topic that segues into maybe a next topic. Is we started this conversation around trust and responsibility as it pertains to the end user, the customer, like how our design engenders trust to them. But you also touched on an interesting topic, is engendering trust within, the context of the work, right? Like within the organization, or maybe as a design freelancer or as a consultant. Actually, we talked about something yesterday about, creating trust as a new person coming into a project, right? Like, let's say, like Prakash consults for some of our clients. He's this like rock star designer jumping in, and there may be like another designer, there may be another lead designer at the client, and you're, kind of the word was, potentially you could be like a bull in a china shop coming in and, basically breaking a lot of things. How do you create, let's touch on the topic of trust there. How do you establish trust, because a lot of people here may be freelancers, they maybe work for agencies and have clients who, they're interfacing with other designers, and, they might look at you coming in as like you're gonna rock the boat a bit, and you're gonna like displace them or something. How do you create that trust?
I love that. There's so many different levels of this trust and responsibility we're talking about. This is why when I first saw the theme, I'm like, I'm not so sure. But then now as we're unpacking this a little bit more, there's so many.
It's like an onion.
Yeah, it's an onion. Just keep having more and more layers. I definitely think so. I've definitely been in the junior position where I didn't know anything, and I was a very junior designer. And now that I'm constantly learning, obviously, but now I'm a little bit more senior. I've been in the position where I get to mentor junior designers, and there's certainly, as you said, a certain way to do that right. I think that being designers, there's this natural tendency to have like the artist chip on your shoulder, to know, because we have so much responsibility, because we are designing the future of how users interact with our products and services, we may think that there's a lot of ego, I'll just say, that's associated with it. And the higher that we climb as designers, the more ego we have. But it's really important, as you work with a design team, that ego needs to be very much tempered. It's very important to like understand that everyone has a very unique perspective, and to not come in there as the bull in the china shop, but really work more collaboratively. Because what are you trying to do at the end of the day? There's a user that you're trying to make successful as quickly as possible. You're trying to give them a delightful experience. And the junior designers that have been there, like, so for example, when I consult with some companies, through Impekable as a design strategist, the designers, even though they might have less experience than me, there's a lot of institutional knowledge that's there. Everyone has something to offer. So sitting down with them and understanding what their perspectives are, you can definitely learn from each other. So as a designer that may be working on a number of different projects, it's really important to build that relationship with potentially more junior designers and understand that everyone has something to offer, and have the patience and the responsibility to mentor and nurture these more junior designers, because that's how we keep our industry going. That's how we create the next generation of good designers out there. So it's so good that you brought that point up. I think that's really important.
Yeah. Well, as an agency, we run into this all the time. I had a very similar story where we were going in as a agency to an existing organization. They already had their own people. The leadership recognized that they needed help, and we're going in. There's already a team there doing this job. It can look, if you are insecure, like, you could think, oh, why are they bringing? We're already doing this. Why do we need these guys, right?
Yeah.
And that can be a challenging proposition for an agency, or we're just trying to do our job. We're just trying to go in and help. One of the ways we create trust within that organization as kind of outsiders coming in to help is understand, have an honest conversation, open conversation, saying, hey, I'm here to help. I'd love to learn what you're good at.
Yeah.
And I'll show you what we're good at.
Yeah.
So this happened a couple weeks ago where we got some back channeling saying, oh, there's some team members who feel like they're a bit insecure. They're good at their craft. They've been here for a long time. Like you said, they have a lot of kind of knowledge, and they could feel a little threatened. So you have to be a little diplomatic. And so that's what we did, was we went in and said, hey, you've been in this business for a long time. We will never know more about this industry than you. So we'll defer to you there. And we'd love to learn what you're good at and what you need help with. We're here to compliment you. We're here to make you look like rock stars.
Yeah.
We're not here to take your job away. We're not here to make you look bad. We're here. Here's, I'd love to learn what you're good at. And here's what we're good at.
Yeah.
And actually that totally changed the conversation, because I did not get any sense of that we were threatening. In fact, he's like, oh wow, I can see you guys are really good at this, and our team doesn't have that experience. We could use your help here.
Yeah.
Like, now we're working together and there's trust.
Yeah.
And speaking of trust, we have the social proof. Oh, we did this for XYZ enterprises.
Yeah.
So the trust was like, oh, you guys help them, you guys must know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that the collaborative nature is fine. And we were talking about this the other day in terms of interviewing, for those more senior people that are out there that do get to interview more junior designers. Interviewing can be very, very daunting for a junior designer to go through the process. And so one of the ways that you as a senior designer can help is by maybe like doing a design exercise with them, not asking them to do one for you, but actually being collaborative and creating an environment, like you said, of collaboration and trust, so they feel comfortable to do their best work, right?
Yep.
And so I think it's so interesting. There's different levels of what we're talking about here. Number one, there's the level of the responsibility that we have in getting our users to trust us with the interfaces that we're putting out there and how we present information to them. The second layer is how we as designers act amongst a leadership framework, right? So if there is someone that we're reporting to or a stakeholder, making sure that they're aware of the responsibility that we have to our users, because at the end of the day, the users are going to be buying or using the products on a day-to-day basis. And then finally, how we interact with one another. You know, as designers, how do we mentor each other if we're more senior? And as junior designers, how can we ask for help in a place that's comfortable to do so? And I think that that's what really helps the field of interaction design and user experience move forward when we're able to collaborate and work with each other on the things that we may not necessarily be so good at. And just keep in mind that everyone has they have life experiences to bring to the table, because that's really what a designer is. It's a beautiful expression of everything, maybe a way that they see the world, right? They're of course going to understand who their users are, that ideal customer profile, but they're going to bring a certain unique flavor that is very different than any other designer that's out there. So being able to access that, I think that's a good framework for thinking about it.
And you touched on a topic, how can designers get mentorship in a trusted environment? One of the things, that kind of reminds me that one of the things we do, actually, I picked it up when we were doing some work at Google, interestingly enough, is, different Google teams, the designers would get together, even if they weren't on the same team, and show each other their products that they're working on, and get peer review from other designers. Even and so like Google Fit folks would look at kind of Google whatever. And I really like that practice. So as an agency, if you're a designer working on this project, you kind of like have your tunnel vision around that project, and a designer working on another project might have tunnel vision around that. And so I really took that best practice and said, let's have designers meet on a regular basis, like we call it designer stand-up. And this is I guess, trusted, safe environment that you can get your work, get critique, and get input, get feedback, get tips on how to improve your work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing that I love about the stand-up is you kind of have a little role-playing. Like the designers are the voice of the user. They pretend like they're the user of the product. They go through it and they ask questions as much as possible. Obviously, it's hard to get the exact narrative right when you're not the actual customer, but the more experience you have as a designer, the easier that becomes to do. And I think I'd love to kind of this is kind of related, but get into the trust and responsibility aspects of giving feedback, right? So it's very hard actually for people to put their work in front of other people and then have it torn down. I think both of us probably have experience having that done. I certainly have, not only within Google, but even outside with some of the other clients that I've worked with.
Hey man, I run a small business. I have no ego anymore. I just get torn down all the time by customers and our team members. So
well, here's the thing. You're a veteran at this point. Maybe your scars are just
I'm so scarred.
You're so
right?
scarred.
It's so deep.
But this is another thing. If you're a product owner and you're watching this, or if you are a design leader and you are having a more junior designer or even a senior designer show you their work, you have the responsibility to give feedback in such a way that is going to encourage them to do their best work moving forward. I think someone said out there around having a good strong stance on interaction designs, best practices, and layouts. We need to make sure we follow these standards, and this is why templates like the one that we're on right now are so great for that. They basically have a baseline for us to start from, but then as you start to innovate and create new experiences from the baseline, making sure that there's a certain tact in the way that you give your feedback to have it be encouraging, candid but encouraging, I think is really important. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how you have learned to give. I know you can take all the feedback now, but how have you learned to give feedback over time, and how do you feel like that fits into this trust and responsibility topic we're talking today?
Sure. Social proof is one, right? I try to have examples, especially here you're trying to, maybe not other designers, like maybe you're trying to sell a client on a design pattern and they're not sure.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, I'm not feeling this. One thing you can pull up is, one thing I do is, hey, we did our research, we did our competitive analysis, we looked at best practices within the industry and across the various industries. So like, hey, maybe like, this big site does it this way, and actually 3 other big sites do it this way, and they're pretty successful. And this is where we didn't pull this design out of thin air, this pattern, this interaction. So that's one.
Yeah.
Just kind of calling, essentially using logos, right? Another is sometimes you do an exercise where essentially the designer ends up coming up with that solution. You kind of maybe potentially steer the conversation, and they arrive to that conclusion.
Yeah.
Because it's easier to convince, if I make it feel like you came up with that idea, I don't have to sell you on my idea,
right,
because it's your idea.
Yeah.
And then also it's, not dictating, right? We're saying, hey, have you looked at this? And have you looked at this? Don't shoot down ideas, right? Like if you're always like, no, it's like getting beat down with a stick,
yeah,
right? So this is, in terms of when I teach, kind of mentor our leadership, right? It's the "and have you thought about" versus "but" or "no," right? Because people don't want to hear that, right?
Yeah.
If you're always shooting down your ideas and like, I'm not going to give you any ideas anymore because I'm going to stop trying.
Yeah.
But like, hey, and have you? That's a great idea. And have you also thought of this?
Yeah.
You're like, oh no, and right? It's just yeah.
Yeah. Those are such important points. There's a certain tact and level and a way to give feedback that is going to encourage, again, like I mentioned, designers to do their best work moving forward, and that you are really an advocate and a collaborative champion with them instead of someone that's going to tear them down because of all your years and years of experience.
Yeah.
So another component that I wanted to talk about was the trust and responsibility. This is getting a little bit more nuanced, but I still think that it's important. The trust and responsibility we have as designers in terms of how we work with engineers and the handoff work that we
there was a question in the audience of how should engineers, designers work with engineers? Do they have to negotiate with the developer, or should they just make the design and hand it off?
Yeah.
So I'd love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think the best outcomes that I've ever seen is when you have a strong relationship with an engineer. And I think someone asked, or someone mentioned in the chat, to be a good designer, you should know development. And, I actually think that part of that is true. You don't have to be like an expert, a code expert by any means, but having a good sense of how the technical stack works and some of the things that engineers have to go through in terms of like implementing the designs that we're creating, I think is really important. And the good thing is that with tools like XD, they make it so simple to go through this, what we call the handoff process, the handoff of our designs to engineering. So if I could just have the screen again real quick, I was just mocking up this like basic marketing site right here, and then I click share, and there's a share for development link, right, that you can just easily publish out to the web. And then when you share it out through your Adobe Cloud account, it's pretty straightforward. It basically creates a page that gives you you can comment on it right here, so your stakeholders can comment on it. But it also gives you this spec link. And in the spec link here, it breaks down all of the different components of your design. If I click on any one of the components, it will tell me the padding, the spacing, even gives me a little CSS snippet over here. And if I have any assets in here, it'll very easily make it easy for me to download all the resources here. So the reason why I wanted to bring this up is because there is a responsibility, again, that we have as designers to work with the teams that are actually building the product. I feel like engineers are the unsung heroes that bring our reality to life. And the easier we can make their job, the better our lives and the product, and then therefore the customer experience is going to be. And then once you communicate a lot of the core values in your design thinking into the engineers, if you build a good relationship with them, they're going to know these things without even you having to ask.
Yeah.
You even having to design. And that's why I love the tools like Adobe XD, because it's like you can be a one-person design show. You can do the design work. You can use templates. You can push it out to the web. There's awesome templates, like I said, to get you started. And then when it's on the web, it's already spec ready, right? Engineers have everything that they need to work with. They can comment on things that are confusing. It's really great.
And I think the word negotiate, like, should you be negotiating with the developer, feels very antagonistic. Meaning, like, oh, if I want this, you're gonna have to give me that. There's like a negotiation, right? Like bartering. I feel like the relationship should be more symbiotic. In the end, you're on the same team trying to build a great product for the business and the user.
Yeah.
Right. You're on the same team, so you shouldn't be negotiating. I feel like the relationship. At Impekable, we try to loop in, if you're a design-centric organization, you might design first and then throw the designs to engineering. If you are, an engineering-centric organization, you might build it all first and it's done, and then just throw it over to a designer, like make it pretty.
Yeah.
Which both of these are bad.
Yeah.
The first one being bad because a designer who doesn't know the constraints of the product or the engineering, like if the API is not available or the feature is not on the roadmap, and they're just designing, features willy-nilly, and then when it gets to the developer and they're like, oh yeah, there's no API for this. Oh, the product can't do this.
Yeah.
Then you failed as a designer because you've created a lot of waste.
Right.
And then the developer, speaking of trust and responsibility, the developer loses trust with the designer because the designer can't be trusted to design something that's realistic.
Yeah.
And the designer's also not, the developer might feel like the designer's not acting responsibly because they don't know what's going on.
Right.
So I think working together from the beginning creates that trust and responsibility bond between designer and developer.
And what's really interesting is that I don't think that I realized, certainly when I was a junior designer, how much power we have as designers to make sure that environment happens, because we are really the person that is creating this vision along with the stakeholders that we're talking about. We're the person in the middle that communicates with the stakeholders, that communicates with the engineers, with QA, that looks at the end product and says, this is not right, we need to make these changes.
Yeah.
So it's our response. I always say, especially to more junior designers, design is one part competence. Like, you have to be able to obviously use the wonderful tools that are getting better and better, and Adobe XD is fantastic for putting together the designs. But the second part is really this communication aspect of it. Like, how do you become the UX evangelist? How do you build relationships within an organization or even outside of an organization in a small team? So everyone is on the same page, everyone is singing the same song, everyone understands who the ideal customer profile is and how you can create the most frictionless and delightful experience together. I think that's something that's so important that I think designers, we have that responsibility to do.
Yeah. And speaking of, kind of the UX process, I'd love to get feedback from the users. Like, is this topic that are these tangents we're going on even interesting for you guys, or are there different topics you'd like us to cover?
Yeah, for sure.
Just, because, as we get down into this rabbit hole, I think I have a tendency to just
we'll just keep talking.
Go off on tangents. So
we'll just keep
if
talking.
you have a topic you're interested in hearing us about, talk about.
Yeah, one of the things as you're putting these things in the chat is working with different stakeholders. There's different tools that XD uses to make this really easy, and we actually created a plugin that I use with clients all the time. That, like, how many times have you created a design and they keep asking for text changes? Right?
That's so annoying.
That happens all the time. And so we actually created this tool that automatically will pull from Google Sheets document and load the text directly into the design. So I'll show you just kind of how to do that real quick, because this is kind of falls into this topic of like trust and responsibility. If we want to make sure that the designs are right, especially if you have a very visual stakeholder, how can you make sure that it's reflective of the text that they want while you can focus on the things that are the most important?
Right.
So here, I'll go to the browser, and I already have this sheet loaded up over here where you can have the different headers, and you can obviously share this with the different stakeholders you have. I'll make it a little bit bigger so you can actually see what's going on. Hopefully this gets a little bit bigger. So the different stakeholders can have access to this document and change the text in whatever way they want. So if I go ahead and if I share this link, so I'm going to copy this link, and then in Adobe XD, you can go to the plugins tab right over here, and there's a Google Sheets plugin. If it's not there, you can go ahead and easily add it from the plus on the plugins menu over here. But if I go to Google Sheets and I can say paste public link, I can paste in the document URL, which is this one that I was just on. And then for the header one, there's no mapping. I can map it to the section header. So each one of these things represent the different layers in my document. So I would ideally go and name this a little bit in a more understandable way so I could see what sections map to which header. But let's say this one, I called this section header 1, and I hit apply. Happy employees stay longer, and as you can see on the Google Sheet over here, section header 1 says happy employees stay longer, right? And so here, this subtext, I'm gonna just move this up a little bit. Let's go back to the layers. This is called subtext 1. So if I went back to the plugin, and if I clicked paste public link, again, that was the link. I'm gonna hit continue, or whoops, let me go back. Let me go to paste public link, and let me make sure that is there. I'm gonna hit continue. Subtext 1, subtitle, apply, right? Keep a pulse on your employees with location-based surveys. So this is a great way to keep a sync on what your stakeholders want, right? So you're oftentimes, you're either, whether you're working with a research team or you're working with different stakeholders, they're gonna be able to change the document, and in real time, you're gonna be able to update the design document there.
Yeah, so in the past, let's say, this is a product that we're working on, right, at Impekable, and, if I'm not the designer, Prakash is the designer, let's say, I said, I'm looking at this and I say, keep a pulse on your employees just reads weird.
Yeah.
How about, can you change it to get a pulse? And you're like, okay, let's see,
I know.
And you'd be like, okay, let me go into the design, do this. But now you have given responsibility or control to me as the stakeholder of the content. So I can just go into the sheet and say, maybe get a pulse, So get a pulse sounds better because you're getting a pulse.
Yeah, he just changed it to get a pulse. And we're actually talking about one of the apps that we're working on right now called Pulse. And what's a good high level of Pulse?
Yeah, so basically Pulse is a way it's a software product for enterprises about user retention and employee retention, really. Basically keeping employees happy. Because the happier employees are, the longer they stay at your company.
Yeah, so basically while they're they're at the cafeteria, for example, they can say like, hey, the food was great today. Very, very easy for them to submit feedback, and it gives the manager a good sense, or the stakeholders a good sense of the zeitgeist and the opinions of all their employees that are working at their organization. So Pek just changed this keep a pulse, right?
Yep.
So here if I refresh the content over here, oops, let me just click on this panel right here. I'll make this smaller so I can make the selection easier. And I hit refresh content. It says get a pulse on your employees.
Boom.
With your location.
You can do that all day long.
Yeah. And another thing, just as a tip, this is something that I learned. Again, I'm not in this as much, but sometimes you'll select the grouping. If you want to select an individual layer, I'm on a Mac. I can just hold down Command and it will select the individual layer. So that sometimes is helpful. If you group lots of objects together and you want to get right into the one that you're selecting, just hold down Command, it's going to highlight it, and then I refresh that link and it says get a pulse. So imagine a world where you're able to just update the design. You can pass this off to a stakeholder, they can edit all the text for you, and then your design updates automatically, which is awesome. So this kind of gets into, like, while this may not seem like a trust and responsibility topic, it is, because over time, as you communicate more with your different stakeholders, with the different team members, tools like XD and these different plugins make it super easy to have you be like almost like a one-person design show and have them have insight, and not only insight, ways that they can contribute to the design, right? A document that they can own themselves, and then you can focus on the interaction, the different details. Because the text obviously is extremely important in the copy that we put on our page, but also we're, as interaction designers, oftentimes we're focused on how do things look and feel, how does a user go through a certain workflow, how can we make them successful faster? So giving your stakeholder ownership over the copy is awesome. It's something that you can pass off. It falls into this bucket of trust and responsibility, and then publishing it to the web, to the spec link, as I was showing here, right? This is a great handoff to your engineers, and making sure that they also have a resource that they can own and they can comment directly on.
So Tim asks, what is another good use case for Google Sheets integration other than updating stakeholders updating content? So I have a great example. When you're designing an app, especially for a global audience, you'll probably have different types of mockups. So for example, we worked on a project where we had to have, it was supporting different regions, right? So you had like English, of course, but we also had to have French, Korean, and a few other languages. So I, as a designer, the designer we had on the team, they don't necessarily know other languages, right? So
what?
Right? Yeah, like, okay, mister, I spent, years in France. So we won't get into that. But, so as you're designing, you might know, one language and maybe another language, but you don't possibly know all the languages. So that can't be on you to know all those. So one great use case for the Google Sheets is having different columns for different language content, and then being able to switch it easily on a dime by having that.
That's good.
Google Sheets makes it very easy to have different mock-ups for different regions.
Right. So this is the whole notion of localization, and this is something that, especially as you work at larger organizations, becomes really important. And obviously, showing different stakeholders or your customers designs in context, in the language that they're used to is important, because, I had worked with clients all the time where the date formatting they would always harp on like, hey, look, I know that that's how you do it in the States, but we format our dates differently.
Right. It's
which is
day, month.
Day, month. So it's, we cannot assume, and I think someone said this earlier in the chat, that we are all, like, we understand who all of our users are. And especially if we're designing internationally, having tools like Adobe XD with Google Sheets is a really easy way to make sure the formatting is right, to make sure the language is relevant, and then, it is all updated in one place. So that's really good. So we've had a couple comments here in the chat around things that we should cover. We'll just start with the bottom one right here. Justin asks, how do you explain the importance of incorporating these tips practices to a smaller company that is tight on resources and time? Why don't you start?
We're a small company, tight on resources and time. Exactly that. We're not a huge agency, right? And a lot of our clients, even though they're big clients, they might be tight on budget for this particular project. So I come in, they don't have unlimited resources. It's not a blank check. So using these tools actually saves a lot of time. Imagine if, imagine your time and material, and the client wants to just tweak the crap out of the content. It's just like they're just racking up.
We all have clients like that.
And it's just like, hey, are you sure you want to do this? Because you're just like racking up minutes and hours. But if you give them the power, it's like, hey, the content is within your hands. Just let me know when you finalize it. I just hit refresh, game over, done.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So, and I would say that, Justin, it kind of starts with, we're talking about trust and responsibility here today, and there's many different layers to what that means. So I think first and foremost, as a designer, whether you're a design team of 1 or 2, making sure, especially if it's a small organization, to have a meeting talking about trust and responsibility and what that means to you as an organization. Because it is such a broad topic, it's something that you need to establish guidelines and principles for yourself. But I do think there's a generalized term of how you communicate with a user, how you communicate with each other as stakeholders, and how you communicate within the design community or the designers within your organization. So having a clear and transparent conversation around that, I think, is a great place to start. And like Pek said, there are tools like Adobe XD and some of the plugins that are available out there that make our lives a lot easier. I remember when I was designing, back in the day when it was like, fireworks, for example. I didn't have nearly the control or the fidelity that we have today here in products like this. And it seems like people were really responding to the spreadsheet plugin, but not only this is one of the plugins that we worked on with Adobe, but there's tons of plugins. I think that's those are definitely something that is they're a pro feature that certainly everyone has access to that most people don't even know about.
Right, they're free. Right, like when you're resource constrained, tools and features, like for example, like the repeat grid, the responsive resize, those are things that So like, I'm an old designer. My first design tool was Photoshop 4. I don't know about you.
I use Photoshop. Yeah.
Which version?
Phil. I don't know if it was 4. I think it was 5 at that point.
Yeah. So 4, right? Like drop shadows. We had to manually do drop shadows.
Yeah. Or fill repeat, like the marquee tool filling.
But now with repeat grid, with responsive resize, they just these designers today have it easy. They have symbols like, oh man, I can just change this and it globally changes. No, back in the day I had to change all the instances when somebody's like, oh, can you change this footer to this? I was like, oh crap, I have all these screens I have to go back and do. Now with symbols, I can just do it in a pinch. Yeah. So being aware of the tools features, in a smaller organization, the more, the more skills or adept you are or comfortable you are with the tools, will save you a lot of time. Yeah. And that's even more important.
Certainly.
In a smaller organization.
But I think it's like one of these things, it's even just like growing up, like the last generation has different problems than the future generation. So even though, for example, the designers today that are designing they don't necessarily have to deal with the same workflow handoff things that we had to deal with when we were using Photoshop to design. Now the whole trust and responsibility topic becomes way more important because you don't have to worry necessarily about the nuances of how to put the pixels on the page, but you do have to worry about how your users perceive the products that you're designing. And
and I think now you can focus on the big problems, right? Like cookies and privacy, right? You don't have to worry about the individual pixels. You don't have to worry about responsive resize. All these tools now take care of it for you.
Yeah. No, 100%. And so I'm so glad that today we've kind of given really a spotlight or a focus on trust and responsibility in the context of interaction design, because it's something that is kind of like this, it's not really talked about too much. I think GDPR has surfaced some of this conversation, but I think just even today in talking with you, I've even unpacked things that I'm like, wow, you know what? I think we as designers we have so much responsibility and trust that is given to us, and there's ways that we can expose it in a good way, and also ways that we can take it downhill and kind of get into these dark patterns that you're talking about. So I think it's so good that we've shown the spotlight on trust and responsibility as a topic here.
It's funny, when I was a young designer getting into things, speaking of feeling powerful, and I actually got into learning about dark patterns because it achieved a certain goal, right? Yeah. It was like I was wielding a weapon and I didn't even think about the consequences. Yeah. It's like, I can. This comes up a lot, right? You download an app and the onboarding, you're just like next. Oh, like if I sneak in, do you want to import all your contacts? Yeah. It's already pre-checked and I'm just hitting next. And I'm just like, oh, wow, I just got all these contacts and now we can just add more users. Looking back, it's like, wow, that's not good.
Yeah. Well, I think just we were immature as designers then, and I think, like I said, I think designers today have a different problem set. It's not the same pixels on page problems. It's just they're bigger problems, like you said, that they're faced with, and I think it's so good that we're having these conversations, because I certainly don't remember having trust and responsibility conversations. I think we were having conversations around trying to build these dark patterns back in the day. Like, how can we get users to give us more, you know?
Right, right.
But I think, you know, that just comes with time. And I think this is why it's important to have conversations like this, because we get to talk amongst each other, we get to talk to the community, and figure out the best practices on how we want to move forward. So, once again, this trust and responsibility is a broad topic, but I think the breakdown really is like we along with Adobe have created tools that make it easy to certainly let the users know that we are going to be collecting data. If you are going to be collecting data, which you don't always have to be, you don't always have to do. And then also the other tools that we're discussing make it really easy for you to communicate with the different stakeholders, not only within your team, but outside your organization. And you as a designer have that trust and responsibility to make sure that you are an evangelist for the user, you are talking to your stakeholders within the organization in a respectful way, and you're giving advice and feedback to your fellow designers in a collaborative way that's going to help them do their best work in the future. So yeah, I feel like that's a pretty good summary of like the different topics that we've covered today. Like, what would you say one of the most from this conversation that we've had? Like, what is something that you've learned that you didn't know before?
Well, I think just when we were talking about this in the beginning, thinking about, or even just a couple days, we're thinking about trust at a very shallow level of how can we create trust and responsibility for the consumer, for the end user.
Yeah.
But then as we've unpacked this, there's like multiple facets to trust and responsibility.
Yeah.
So that's, the rabbit hole goes.
The rabbit hole keeps climbing, and I think someone was asking, like, as a junior designer, what can they do? I think that's a really interesting question, because you may feel like you have no power to influence anything, and I think that is like, one of the things that I think we learned here and unpacked here today is the importance of speaking up, especially around these more nuanced. Like, you don't have to be like a superstar veteran designer to understand the concept of trust and responsibility and being a champion for the user and an advocate for the user within whatever company that you're working for. So I think, like I said, and this goes to Justin as well, that was asking about how they can get this started in a smaller organization, having a conversation, like, set a meeting this week or early next week around trust and responsibility. Talk about what that means in your company. Talk about the core values that your company or the product that you're designing for wants to have, and then furthermore, like how you want to put that product out into the world. I think it's a great time to be talking about this. Like, it's been in the news cycles lately around data privacy and data collection, but I think as we've learned here today, there's so many more dynamics. There's different dynamics and different layers and facets to all of this stuff. And look, download the cookie banner, and make it your own. I think, again, using these components, we make it really easy to just copy and paste it into your designs. But I'd love to see out there on your Behance, like, the different cookie banners that you come up with, and examples of sites that do a really good job at making the user very aware of what's going on in a fun and delightful way. So yeah, that's good. Is there anything else that we want to cover that we didn't cover today, as we wrap up here?
Yeah, I mean, just to touch on that subject of what, as a junior designer, can you do? I mean, pointing to, like folks like Koi Vin, who just went on right before us, he's spent a good 30 minutes talking about this topic, and he's one of the most influential designers in the world. So kind of pointing to, hey, if this is important to this guy, it might be important to the company here.
Yeah.
So, and you have more resources today than ever before, right? Like programs like this Adobe Live Show.
Yeah.
Us on Interaction Design Day talking about this. Back when we were young designers, none of this existed. Nobody was talking about this. And even if there was, like, there wasn't social media to uncover that. So they were all being talked in silos.
Yeah.
And nowadays we can point to, okay, folks at Impekable are talking about this, folks at Google are talking about this, folks at, it's an important issue.
Yeah.
So it's worth at least, kind of being aware that if it's important for these companies, it's probably important.
Yeah, 100%. And I think just the last topic that I want to talk about is our responsibility in furthering the field of interaction design. I think we talked a little bit about mentorship here, but it's in creating these delightful experiences. I mean, all of you that are on the chat that are interaction designers, I'm sure that you can remember using something that inspired you, using something that took away the complexity and the busyness of the bad design that can be out there, and then you saying to yourself, you know what, I want to do this. And so, what did you do in order to become the designer that you are today? Who helped you along the way? And remembering that you have that power and responsibility to influence the future generation of designers. Just as we're sitting here and talking, we've been in the industry for a long time now, but we don't have all of the answers. And so, we're here sharing what we know and our opinions on things. But you also have unique perspectives that you can share with future designers and thought leaders within this space. And we want to keep this going. We want to keep the conversation going around good interaction design best practices, because it makes the world better. It makes the world easier to use, right? Yeah. And so I think that we as designers have a responsibility to evangelize for our practice, and not only to be better at our craft, but be better at spreading the word. So if you don't have if you don't have anyone that you're mentoring or sharing your skills with, I would encourage you to either get involved in a meetup. There's so many different ways that you can get involved in some of the forums that Adobe has. There's so many different ways that you can spread your thought leadership in interaction design, and I think that's the trust and responsibility that's been given to us as designers to do.
Well, speaking of responsibility, as you've leveled up and learned more and have all this experience, I want to call out to the folks in the audience that Prakash has an amazing podcast. Do you want to talk about your podcast a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. So part of the responsibility that I have within, spreading the word of design is I have a podcast. It's called Chapter 1. You can look up Chapter 1 in Prakash. And it really kind of goes into going from 0 to 1. How do you start something that you might be afraid to start? So for example, if you are a designer here that is looking to potentially get into interaction design, but maybe you're scared to break out of a field or a career that you're stuck in, then I interview people that tell stories of how they kind of broke out, or how they break out of the flow of the day-to-day of whatever career they're in and start something new. So I think from my perspective, I think it's all about having the confidence to break out and to try something, to design something. And with tools like Adobe XD, it makes it so easy to do. I love that, and anyone can download it and start designing immediately. I have, I'm based in Santa Barbara. Shout out to Santa Barbara. I run the user experience meetup group there, and I just did an XD talk there because I wanted to show people how easy it was to get up off the ground and start designing. And I am practicing what I preach. I definitely want to further the field of interaction design. And so that this whole notion of trust and responsibility, it's something that I try to practice, whether it be through the meetup, whether it be through my podcast, or whether it be through the mentorship of more junior designers. And I definitely am still learning from all of the people that I interact with. And so, and I know that you at Impekable also do this not only within your organization, but you're bringing on new designers too, right?
Yeah, all the time. We're a growing company, so we're always hiring. Actually, we're looking for senior designers looking to work remotely in the U.S. Primarily for now, and then we also have open positions for remote senior designers elsewhere, as well as lead engineers, mobile engineers. And if you're interested, that's just hr@impeccable.com.
Yeah, I think it's been really fascinating to see how much the field of interaction design and UX and UI has just exploded over time. Especially from 5 years ago, where the field is today, and just the fact that we're able to have these conversations with each other and about trust and responsibility and getting out of the weeds a little bit and talking about what is important to the users. I think it's something
Yeah.
that's great.
Yeah, I mean, interaction design didn't exist, right? I think when I started, it was like even web designers was barely a thing, because web development or the web had just started. So just the field of web development, user experience wasn't even in the a term.
Yeah.
But at some point, I think, kind of during Apple's resurgence, design kind of became forefront in software and kind of the user experience field. And that's about when I became interested from transitioning from a web developer to a web designer.
And do you remember, I was one of the things that I was mentioning earlier was that experience or that product that like changed everything for you. Do you remember what that was?
Oh, yeah. The iPod.
So the
iPod.
Yeah,
I was just like, this is amazing. The iPod is amazing. I want to be in this field. I want to do this.
Yeah.
It's so easy to use. And
do you remember along the way, like other designers or resources that helped you along to get into this field of user experience or interaction design?
Well, I think Apple did a really good job of inspiring me, and then looking at Apple. Yeah, I actually hadn't used Apple products yet, other than the iPod. That was like my gateway drug into Apple design, and then I learned about Johnny Ive, and I learned more about design. Learned about user experience, and generally, I felt like that practice got me closer to the customer, and that I can influence how products are used. And I really enjoyed that versus like the functional, like for me, I started viewing engineering as pure utility of making it work, whereas product design, UX design I was influencing how customers use the product.
Yeah.
And whether they had a good experience or bad experience, a good chunk of that was the user experience.
Yeah,
design.
Absolutely. And I think it's so funny that you say the iPod because that was 100% for me.
Really?
The iPod as well. I think here's the thing. When I was designing in Photoshop or designing before, I didn't really have this notion of delight in my mind. I just was like, I need to make this thing usable. And that could mean a lot of different things. But this notion of like a delightful experience, like, oh my, this is great, and I remember using the iPod and being like, this is so different than anything else that's out there. This is going to change everything. And to watch that evolution over time of those different products. And now certainly there's so many different things that are delightful out there, but I think this notion of as you designing with delight in mind, making sure that you can create these delightful user experiences is important. So you can make something usable, you can take out the friction, but how can you take it one step further and really wow people? And I think that's something that even people. I am mentoring someone that works at a government agency on an app. Like, how can I delight something within within the context of what I do? And I was like, there's always a way. You can always figure out a way to whatever user that you have in mind, or that ideal customer profile, you can make a or a delightful experience. So with that, I think we can start wrapping this up. What's next on the agenda?
Yeah, so we have our next speaker is Josh Silverman,
Okay,
and
awesome.
with our colleague Lindsay Monroe.
Okay,
who's going to be up.
Yeah, fantastic. So we have a fantastic day of events that are just set up for you here. We really want to thank Adobe so much for having us talk about this today. It's been a wonderful experience, and there's a lot of amazing people that are coming up. We've got a daily design challenge that you can participate in. So many great things here. And I want to really just express our thanks to all of you for tuning in, for listening to this, for contributing your comments and notes. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for taking your morning and evening or whatever time of the day. We really appreciate it. And we want to thank the great folks at Adobe who pleasure to work with.
Absolutely. There's magicians around us making this screen in the background and all the sound.
And then also just taking care of us in general.
Absolutely. It's been amazing. Adobe has been great. And it's so funny. We talked about Photoshop, back in the day. It's an Adobe product. When we have grown with Adobe over time. You know,
Yeah.
like these all the different Adobe products that we've used, and we still use Adobe products today. So it's been absolutely a staple in this design community. So thank you so much.
Yeah, we wouldn't be here.
No,
If there
we
was
wouldn't.
no Photoshop, there's no XD,
Absolutely
we wouldn't
not.
be here. So
Absolutely not.
That's crazy.
Yeah, really,
And now we're
really
here.
appreciate it, everyone. So thank you so much for the time that you've given us. We truly appreciate it. And is there anything you also want to share about Impeccable? About anything else? Like where can they learn
Oh
more?
yeah, they can learn more about.
Yeah.
I'll leave stuff in the comments. So
Yeah.
it's just impeccable.com. We said that we are looking for designers. If you want to send us email, it's
Yeah.
Pek at hr@impeccable.com. If you want to reach me,
Yeah.
it's my name first name and last name. How can folks reach you? What would so the Twitter. That's just at Impeccable.
Yeah, the best place to reach me is just actually Instagram. That's kind of the only network that I use these days, and that's Prakasham. And so and I can go ahead and comment in there later. But yeah, I think the big takeaway here is like definitely use the cookie banner, and yeah, we had a great time with you this morning, and we look forward to the next one.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
All right.
Bye.